Alrighty, sorry about the delay. Welcome back to another thrilling installment of Mecha Mondays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fragath, and today we're going to be starting the second book of the Full Metal Panic series, Rampaging One Night Stand. Um, I think they give a rough recap of what happened in the previous novel, light novel. But if they don't, basically, this organization, this theoretically mercenary organization that lurks behind the scenes of geopolitics named Mithril, um, basically decides we have to protect this person. We have to have this person under observation because the Soviets are after her. And they assign someone of a similar age to watch over them. She is a high school girl, so this has to be a high school boy, and they have just the man, Sagara Sousuke, and unfortunately he is not well socialized. He does not know this school thing, he knows only war, which is one of those things that's kind of horrifying on the face of it. Um, Seems goofy, becomes scary, and then is played to comedic effect again. This is going to kind of delve into the whole child soldier thing a bit. So we've already lightly touched on this, but not really. This is where we start kind of nitty-grittying. There's issues with this. We aren't unfortunately going to do too much. Oh, he's going to just have incredible PTSD. Instead, we're going to do the whole he's a combat machine robot because that's the only way he could survive. And how does his character grow from here? Um, let me set aside. That's odd. Let's get to that point and see how we end up. This is a fairly rom-commy series, to anyone who hasn't tuned into the previous ones, like flagrantly romantic comedy, while also having like military thriller shenanigans and also some giant robots. Sagara Sousuke is in the unenviable position of being a very straight-laced, pragmatic character in a universe, as we found out at the end of the first book, in which there's like some really hot-blooded use your willpower type shenanigans occurring, or there's room in the setting for that, and he's not really sure what to do with any of this. There's multiple levels of juxtaposition that'll go on throughout the series. So yeah, I don't know when this one was written. Let's see if this will actually tell me. It should in the beginning, but as I recall, it didn't. Second one is from 99. First one's from 98, 99. He does roughly one a year, I think, for like the next 10 years, if memory serves. It's pretty good about that. Anyway, without further ado, we'll get crack-a-lackin'. I forgot to hit the button. Full Metal Panic, Rampaging One Night Stand, Shouji Gatou. Prologue. At lunchtime, the school roof served as a sort of student sanctuary, a place where they could act outside their teacher's notice. The rainy season was in full swing, but this particular day happened to be clear, with a blue sky and bright sunlight that seemed to bleach the roof white. Two people stood at one corner of the roof. One was a girl with short hair. Her back was pressed against the fence, her gaze lowered, expression troubled. The other was a boy with long hair. He had the girl pinned between the fence and himself, a lit cigarette in his right hand. "Come on, Noriko, tell me. You don't like me, is that it?" the long-haired boy asked. The girl, Noriko, looked up at him pleadingly. Of course not. You know I love you, Mikio." "So what's the deal?" he demanded to know. "Why won't you go past first base? We've been dating for 2 months now." "Well, I'm just scared," the girl stammered out in reply. Her boyfriend, Mikio, rolled his eyes and exhaled a jet of cigarette smoke. "What is this, middle school? Come on, we should learn more about each other." "We can learn other things about each other." "That's not enough. I want to learn more about—" Blam! His words were cut off by a sudden gunshot. Stunned, Mikio and Noriko turned to find its origin and saw the water tower, a gray structure jutting out against the blue of the sky. They peered at it curiously. At the lip of the tower they could see a boy, lying on his stomach, holding a rifle. He had a sullen expression, which was punctuated by a tight frown. His gun was pointed at a corner of the schoolyard. Beside him were various cases of munitions and explosives, and things that looked like small green aluminum cans. It was Sagara Sousuke from Class 2-4. They knew him as a transfer student, recently repatriated after growing up in war-torn regions overseas, and also as a war-obsessed fool who stuck out like a sore thumb in a peaceful country like Japan. He was looking through binoculars, probably at the target he'd shot moments ago. He hummed thoughtfully, sat up, wrote something on a clipboard, then loaded a new round into the rifle. He took aim at the corner of the yard once again, then fired. Another gunshot rang out, and Sousuke again checked the results with his binoculars. This time he shook his head as if unsatisfied, and wrote something new on the clipboard. It was only then that he glanced over at Mikio and Noriko, as if noticing them for the first time. "Don't mind me. Continue," he said as he loaded another round into the chamber. He seemed to have no interest in them whatsoever. There was another moment of silence. Then, awkwardly, they resumed their conversation. Look, I just think it's time already," Mikio insisted. "Are we—" Oh, wait. I just forgot which one is which. I don't think it really matters because I don't think we ever see them again. "Look, I just think it's time already," Mikio insisted. "Are we boyfriend and girlfriend or not?" "Well, we are, but—" Blam! "I really love you, Noriko." "I'm glad, but Mikio—"
Blam! Isn't it natural for a guy to want to get closer to the girl he loves?"
"It is, but—"
"Really? Then let's do it. Tonight. Blam!
"Tonight my parents are—"
Blam! Blam! Tonight. Blam! 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 Ah, screw it!"
Too exasperated to continue, Mikio mussed up his hair and ran at the water tower. He took a drag off his cigarette, glared up at Sousuke, and shouted,
"Hey, you!"
"What?" Sousuke asked distractedly.
"Do you mind?" Mikio demanded. "Pack that crap up and take it somewhere else."
Sousuke looked down at him, brow knitted, and seemed to think for a minute.
"I can't do that," he concluded. "I need an appropriate distance for my sighting shots." "What the hell are you talking about?" "It's approximately 300 yards from the roof to the corner of the schoolyard. I have a rifle that I recently purchased, whose accuracy I'm testing with a variety of cartridges. It's a curious firearm. For some reason, it seems most compatible with rounds made in Egypt, so I decided to test its performance with my own propellant ratios."
Sousuke's expression was thorough, considered, and completely over Mikio's head. But before he could finish,
"Sousuke!"
the door under the water tower banged open, and a girl came flying out onto the roof.
"Chidori," he acknowledged.
This was Chidori Kaname, vice president of their student council. She was dressed in a white and blue uniform, and had long black hair accented with a red ribbon. She fixed her eyes on Sousuke and said,
"I knew it would be you! People are studying for the big test in there. Who can concentrate with all that blam, blam, blam?"
"It's been raining so much lately. I wanted to do my sighting shots while I had a clear day," he explained. "In just 10 shots, I'll be done with the Group A powder mixes. If you'd just let me—"
"Like hell!" she exploded. "Knock it off now!"
"But
I said knock it off, you! Kaname yanked off her slipper and chucked it at Sosuke's head. Ah! Sosuke dodged, but the slipper bounced off his shoulder and hit one of the green cans at his feet. The lidless can toppled off the tower, scattering its contents in the direction of Mikio, holding a cigarette in his mouth below. The cigarette was lit. The label on the falling can read, "Black Powder." The two watched it fall, helpless to intervene. Whoosh! Mikio had just dropped his cigarette and turned around when the dull explosion occurred behind him. Flames and smoke roared up, and Mikio was blown onto his face. What the? Mikio turned, then suddenly screamed. He started running all around the roof with his back ablaze, like the famous scene from The Farmer and the Badger. "Help!" he cried out. "Mommy!" "Mikio!" the girl shrieked. Mikio was now on the ground, rolling back and forth. Kaname ran up to him with a fire extinguisher. "Clear the way!" she yelled. She pulled the handle, releasing a spray of white powder that put out the fire immediately. Once the smoke had cleared, Mikio could be seen lying face down on the floor, twitching. Kaname let out a sigh of relief, with a little cough mixed in, and then wiped the sweat from her brow. Sosuke crammed his things into his backpack, touched down lightly on the roof, then walked up to the collapsed Mikio. "It was extinguished promptly," he said reassuringly. "You should get off with light burns." "I know this happens all the time, and he and I are partly to blame in this case, but," Kaname prefaced quietly before slamming the empty fire extinguisher into the back of Sosuke's head. Clonk! "That was extremely painful," Sosuke observed. "Shut up!" she fumed. "Don't bring explosives onto school grounds." "The rules don't forbid it." "You want another attack?" "Sorry, you want another smack?" Kaname brandished the fire extinguisher. Sosuke backed up slowly. They stared each other down like a cobra and a mongoose. It seemed like violence could break out at any minute when... Beep beep, beep beep, beep beep. An electronic trill came from Sosuke's chest. He held up a hand as if to say, "Time out," and pulled a small mobile phone from his breast pocket. "Uru 7 here," he whispered. "Understood. RV at Point Echo at 1325. Roger that. I'm on my way." With his conversation finished, Sosuke shouldered his bag and ran at top speed toward the entrance to the roof. "Where are you going?" Kaname demanded. "Something came up," he told her. "Stay close to home." "Wait! You?" But Sosuke ignored her and ran out the door. "Oh, come on, Sosuke!" she complained. "Did you forget the promise we made last night? Damn it!" "Darn it, sorry." She says, "Darn it." Kaname stared at the closed door for a while, then put her hands on her hips and let out a sigh. She turned back to the boy on the floor and his girlfriend, who was on the verge of tears. "So, can I help you to the nurse's office?" she offered, weakly. Oh, thank you for tuning in, Fractal Hollow. Hello, a long-time lurker. Just want to drop a heads up and say check out the writing and reading category. Hope it helps. I tried fiddling with that not so long ago, and it probably didn't work. But I'll double check through that to make sure it's putting it into the right category. Thank you. Chapter 1, Foreign Customs. 24 June, 1401 hours, Japan Standard Time. New Tokyo International Airport, Narita, Chiba Prefecture. "Where am I?" he murmured to himself. He was walking, dragging his spinner suitcase behind him, as part of a line of people entering the country. Everything seemed blurry. The corridor, the people, the light through the windows. "I'm at customs in an airport. That's right. I'm returning to this country after a year and a half away. I received extensive training and conditioning, and I came back to do something.
The next question occurred to him.
Do something? But what? Yes, I remember. I came here to operate that thing. That devil machine that no one else can tame. That which, once started, can never be stopped. I will spread destruction and terror, death upon death, ruin upon ruin. And as for that city I loathe so much, I... But who am I?
His irritation grew worse. A sudden swelling of hatred seized at his throat.
I have a name. Kugayama Takuma. That's right. I'm 15 years old, just returning from a study abroad in New Zealand. That's the story, anyway. But my real name is Tatakawa Takuma. Even within A21, I'm special. Yeah, I feel sick. I'm so angry. Should I have taken my medicine after all? No, I'm all right. I can bear it a while longer.
A customs agent approached. No, he was the one approaching the agent.
A middle-aged man, just past age 40. The tie of his uniform is crooked, 4 degrees askew. I don't like it. Fix it. Hurry up and fix it, you old...
Fighting back the urge to reach for the man's neck, he handed over his passport with a guileless smile. Without any sign of suspicion,
The great fool.
the official took the passport from him and glanced through it.
Home stay? The man asked. No, a short study abroad.
Takuma responded calmly, as innocent as could be.
Wow, the official said admiringly. By yourself? Yes, of course by myself. Fix your damn tie.
Your parents weren't worried? The official inquired.
Not really. They trust me.
Takuma said with a bright smile. All the while he was thinking,
I want to hurt someone, to tear him to pieces. It would feel so good. Big Sister would say I was good then, too. Oh, maybe not. What would Big Sister think? He wondered. Big Sister, dear Big Sister. She's back here already, isn't she? Making preparations for me. Just for me. To pilot that devil. I'll be able to see her soon. Big Sister.
the official stamped his passport. He didn't even try to check his bags. Go, the man was saying.
What?
You can go, I said.
What about your tie? Fix it. It annoys me. What's wrong with you? You dullard, imbecile, trash. Just die!
What are you talking about? The official asked him. Takuma's breathing picked up.
Big Sister, I hate him. Why won't he just fix it?
Are you all right? The official asked, sounding uncertain. Takuma let out a groan, then a bark.
Unforgivable. He's mocking me. Big Sister.
Hey! The official began to say something. With a sudden scream, Takuma leapt over the counter. He tackled the official, punched him, kicked him, then got on top of him. He planted his hands on the man's throat and squeezed. It felt good.
More. More.
As the customs agent writhed and gasped, Takuma began to laugh. He kept applying force, and the man's eyes rolled back in his head. Security personnel and officials nearby all flew on him. They tried to pull him off, but he wouldn't relent.
Well, do you realize what a nothing you are now? Look at you, flapping your mouth like a fish on dry land. You're dying, you see, looking stupid and ugly. How funny. Big Sister. Big Sister.
June 22:55 hours, Manila Standard Time. 40 kilometers west of Vigan City, Luzon, northern Philippines. In a jungle clearing there stood a model of a city. It was comprised of cheaply made buildings riddled with bullet holes and lit by artificial lighting. It didn't resemble any city in the world. This was a place for staging practice bouts of urban warfare.
No more games. Take those hostiles out, one shot apiece, the lieutenant colonel barked to the trainees, his voice loud enough to be heard over the gunshots. Don't hold back! You're hunting dogs! Run! Plant your teeth in their throats! The trainees, budding terrorists from various countries, showed no sign of exhaustion. The bullets their instructors rained down at them inspired no fear as they carried out their roles with speed and efficiency. Kill! The colonel ordered them. Everyone you see is an enemy. No mercy, not even to children. Human target boards, ragged from long use, popped out from windows, doors, and alleyways. Bullets flew. Metal screeched. In a room somewhere, a grenade exploded. At last, the gunshots began to die out, replaced by reports of "clear" from radios here and there. The colonel, an assault rifle in one hand and a stopwatch in the other, stared at the timer as he waited for the shots to cease completely. "Clear," came the final report at last, and he hit the stopwatch's plunger with his thumb. He checked the time the mock battle had taken, then snorted. "Line up!" His aide, a nearby captain, ordered. "Line up!" His aide, a nearby captain, ordered. From all over the practice grounds, the trainees came running to line up in front of the colonel. There were a little more than 15 in all, and 1 in 5 were women. The group was made up of all different races and dressed in basic gray urban combat fatigues. "All right." The colonel cleared his throat before addressing the trainees. "You've been training here for 3 weeks now. At first I thought you were all pathetic incompetents, but now I see that's not totally true. 2 of you broke down, 2 ran away. Well, that's fine. You're becoming tolerable killers. Just don't get cocky." It was the last lecture of the day, so the colonel decided to relish it. He went on and on about how green they still were, how badly they used their equipment, how hard it was to slip past various countries' security forces. It all went on for about 5 minutes. "Understand?" he finished. "You don't have enough hate inside. You need more. Hate me, hate the world. If you can do that, there'll be no military, no police force that can ever touch you. That's all." Once the colonel wrapped up, his aide asked the trainees, "Any questions?" After a brief silence, one raised his hand. "Speak." "You've been saying if you graduate from here, you'll be more than a match for any military or police force. But what if we're fighting something else?" "What do you mean?" the colonel asked. "Mithril," the trainee answered. His reply caused the colonel's brow to furrow in confusion. "Mithril? And what exactly is that?" "A mysterious special forces unit that operates independently out of any nation. An arms dealer in Singapore told me rumors about them before I came here. They bring together the most skilled personnel, and it's said that if they come after you, you're finished." The colonel snorted. "Nonsense! Exaggerated tripe!" "But they say people have actually seen them," the trainee protested. "That they've raided training camps like ours, stamping out insurgencies all over." "Enough!" Driven past his breaking point, the colonel unleashed his fury on the trainee, grabbing him by the collar. "Mithril! Ha! You must not have faith in my training if you're swallowing nonsense like that." "Forgive me," the trainee gasped, choking in the colonel's grip. As the exchange went on, the other trainees exchanged glances and whispers. "I've heard of them, too." "Same here. That incident in Sunan."
What if they come after us?
The whispers stopped abruptly under the colonel's sudden glare. "I can see I've been laboring under a misapprehension," the man shouted, with no intention of hiding his rage. "I guess you haven't learned anything in these past 3 weeks at all. You think this place could be attacked? This camp, which the military can't even touch? Look around you." He pointed to the makeshift base just off the training ground and the rows of weapons within. Tanks, armored cars, surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft guns, and, though old-fashioned, they had 2 attack helicopters as well. The camp also housed 2 arm slaves, those humanoid beasts, standing 8 meters tall and clad in dark green armor. These were the modern day's greatest land weapon, as a single one of them could take the place of 100 infantrymen.
Any force strong enough to face down firepower like this would be detected before they got close. That includes the U.S. Army.
The colonel's confidence was no bluff. There was a high-sensitivity sensor network running 20 kilometers around their base on all sides. It would truly take an unreal force to slip through all of that and catch them by surprise.
Think about it. The base's impregnability is why I can train you so hard. No one, under any circumstances, will ever catch us by
The next instant it came. An arrow of fire fell from the sky onto a tank parked 10 meters away. It was followed by a second, a third. There was a squealing sound of metal.
What?
The colonel began to ask. The tank sparked before exploding, seemingly from the inside. The colonel and the others were bowled over by the force of the blast. The attacks from above continued, now against the armed slaves kneeling next to the tank. It was like a red rain was falling on the camp.
Something's coming. From the sky? Who? How? And why didn't our radar detect the attack?
The colonel looked up. At first he couldn't see any sign of their attackers. But as he strained his eyes against the night sky, he noticed distortions in the starlight, almost like a heat haze.
Is that?
From one of those atmospheric flickers came a sudden surge of blue lightning. Like black ink oozing out from a thin veil of light, 3 figures appeared. This was ECS, the ultimate hologram integrated stealth system. But to achieve total invisibility, nobody had that ready for battle yet. Did they? The 3 figures were soldiers who were dangling from parachutes. Firearms ready, they descended on the base, firing shots sporadically.
Just 3 soldiers, though?
The colonel wondered. No, they weren't soldiers. They weren't even human. They were far too big.
Armed slaves?
He gasped incredulously. The ASs descending upon them were unlike anything he'd seen before. They had rounded, gray armor plates, and a frame that was lithe yet strong, much closer to a human form. These never-before-seen gray machines. Was this Mithril? Were they here? The 3 aesthetically pleasing ASs detached their parachutes 50 meters above the base and plunged into furious freefall. Then, like the titans of legend released from their chains, they crashed onto locations all around the base and began to wreak havoc. Sparing no fire from their giant rifles and shotguns, they tore the armored cars and helicopters to shreds. They routed the panicking soldiers with their head-mounted machine guns, kicked jeeps aside, and broke watchtowers in half. "You can't run and you can't hide! Surrender!" one machine shouted from its external speakers. To the colonel's shock, it was a young woman's voice. Her AS's palm unleashed a taser at the fleeing trainees. The electricity knocked them out, one after the other. The colonel could only watch helplessly as his base was torn to shreds. Destruction and capture of main targets confirmed. Switch to search mode? His machine's AI suggested in its deep male voice. Affirmative, he answered. Switch to active mode. Roger. ECS off. ECCS on. The AI executed the operator's commands immediately. Inside the cockpit that engulfed him, Sagara Sousuke carefully studied the display on the screen. These gray ASs were the main armament of Mithril, the mercenary force with which Sousuke was aligned. They were known as the M9, or the Gernsback, and they possessed cutting-edge specs that were far beyond those available to rank-and-file armed forces. Fires continued to rage around the jungle stronghold. With their tanks, armored cars, and invaluable ASs in pieces, most of the enemy soldiers had surrendered. About 50 in all had been gathered in the central plaza of the mock city, hands raised. Now and then, one of them thought they saw an opening and tried to escape, but whenever that happened, Sousuke or one of his companion machines unceremoniously hit them with a taser. Their mission was almost over. They just had to search the prisoners for the Japanese group they were looking for and hand the rest over to the Filipino government. The operator of an ally machine, standing back to back with Sousuke's AS to watch over the other side of the base, called him on the radio.
Easier than expected, eh, Sousuke?
The laid-back voice belonged to Sergeant Kurtz Weber, Sousuke's comrade. He was operating an M9 Gernsback, identical to Sousuke's own. That statement seems premature. Remain on guard for ambush units using heavy weaponry. Sousuke responded steadily.
Please, we're fine. Not even a rocket can dent these babies.
Kurtz responded, referring to the M9s. I'm more worried about the prisoners. We can't complete our mission if they're killed by stray fire.
Oh, I get it, you unfeeling bastard.
Kurtz grumbled.
I'm a man fresh off his sickbed, remember?
Stop talking and confirm the targets, Sousuke demanded.
Fair enough.
Kurtz's M9 stepped in front of the prisoners. He began, his voice blaring out through the external speakers.
Are there any Japanese trainees here? They'll be young from a terrorist group called A21. You won't be killed or harmed, so if you're here, please come out.
The prisoners remained silent to a man, turning to each other questioningly.
Nobody? Come on, you there. Mask off,
Kurtz ordered.
You too. Hurry it up.
As the M9 began to brandish its taser, several of the men quickly removed their balaclavas. Sousuke magnified his screen image and studied the men's faces. They're not here, he said. Some of them had Japanese facial features, but none matched the pictures on the briefing document given to them earlier.
You're right, Kurtz trailed off. What's going on here?
Their pre-mission briefing had said a Japanese terrorist group was in hiding here. It was an organization called A21, which had planned some bombings in the city several years ago, but their plan had been exposed, and they had fled overseas. It was rumored that they were plotting a new incident of terrorism soon, though. They're not here, Sousuke repeated. Just then, the M9 of Master Sergeant Melissa Mao returned from its foray of chasing escapees into the jungle. It was holding 4 taser-paralyzed terrorists in its arms.
No luck here, either. I couldn't find one Japanese person. Guess we just got a bad draw.
More bogus info from intelligence, huh? Damn it.
Kurtz's M9, relaying its operator's intent, kicked over a nearby drum. The act sent a tremble of fear through the prisoners. It's not an uncommon occurrence. If they're not here, they're not here. We should hand these people over to the Filipino military, then meet up with the transport chopper at the landing. Oh, it's not an uncommon occurrence. If they're not here, they're not here. We should hand these people over to the Filipino military, then meet up with the transport chopper at the landing. Suddenly, Sousuke stopped. With his face clouded over in anguish, he let out a sound between a groan and a sigh, and then shook his head.
What's wrong?
Kurtz inquired, noting Sousuke's behavior. The M9 was shaking its head in mimicry of its operator. I forgot, Sousuke moaned at last, in tones of sheer agony. I forgot. Hearing that, Kurtz's M9 went on alert, swinging its rifle back and forth.
What is it? You're usually so cautious. You forget to encrypt your channel or something stupid like that?
No, not like that. It's something even worse.
What the hell is it?
I made a promise to someone, Sousuke explained, to meet up at 1900 hours today.
Huh?
She's going to be so mad at me, he whispered. A cold sweat had risen on his brow. He was in complete disarray. It was hard to believe he was the same person coldly carrying out orders just a few minutes ago.
Who'd you promise?
Kurtz wanted to know. Kaname. I was supposed to stop by her house so she could help me to study for the term final test. Japanese history is my weakest subject, so... The soldiers of Kurtz's M9 slumped. Third-generation ASs were capable of this motion, thanks to their more complex joint structures.
You are really something,
he said. Must be tough. A soldier with a side job, Mao added as she dumped her unconscious Hall into the prisoner ring. Filipino Army transport helicopters will arrive in 5 minutes. Finish the questioning before then. After we hand over the hostages, we'll start moving toward the RV point. Got it?
Oro 6, roger that.
Oro 7, roger that. Sousuke answered despondently. This was the other side of Sagara Sousuke, elite member of Mithril's top secret special forces. He was also a high school student in Tokyo. June 1518 hours, Greenwich Mean Time. Amphibious assault submarine Tuach de Danann, 50-meter depth, Luzon Strait. It was a bust? Tessa inquired, her brow knitting, after hearing Melissa Mao's report. She was sitting in the central control room of the massive Mithril submarine, a room the size of a lecture hall, from which orders could be issued to both the submarine crew and their ground forces. From her captain's chair she had a view of the room's 3 large front screens and the stations for about 15 personnel. Tessa, Talitha Testarossa, was the captain of the amphibious assault submarine, Tuach de Danann. She looked like a girl in her mid-teens, with large gray eyes and ash-blonde hair, which was styled in a braid that draped over her left shoulder. The rank insignia COL gleamed on her pale brown civilian clothing. Yes, ma'am. No signs of the terrorist organization A21 had found. Oh, sorry. Yes, ma'am. No signs of the terrorist organization A21 found, Mao responded over the radio. And no one connected to them either. We questioned the camp's instructor. Apparently 10 days prior, a Japanese group matching their description came to the camp to observe. Where did they go after that? Tessa wanted to know. He said he heard they were going from Manila to the Gold Coast, but I'd bet that's BS. The man doesn't know anything. Mao told her in disgust. So they feigned joining the camp, then took off. They really did get the better of us, didn't they? Tessa sighed. The intelligence division had reported that the terrorist group in question was doing its final training in that camp, but apparently they'd been ill-informed. I'm sorry. I wasted your time. It's not your fault, Tessa, Mao responded kindly. Anyway, we're about to head to the RV point. Is that okay? Yes. Return here as planned. I'll be waiting. Roger that. Ending transmission. In a window in the corner of the screen that displayed who she was talking to, the word Uruz 2 switched from red to green. Tessa sighed and sat back in her seat. For heaven's sake! It's common enough, her executive officer, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Mardukas, said from nearby. He cast a gloomy glance at the front screen through the black-rimmed glasses that sat on his lean technician's face. Noting his expression, Tessa responded, We can't dismiss this as common enough. The terror group A21 has acquired Soviet-made ASs, hasn't it? If they unleash them on the city, it will be a disaster. Of course, Captain, but we aren't omnipotent, Mardukas protested. It's necessary to dismiss some failures with, these things happen. That sounds like indolence to me. She had been given all of this equipment, all of these people. She and her squad had to be as close to omnipotent as possible. Perfect information, perfect planning. That was Tessa's ideal blueprint for her organization.
It is not indolence, it is flexibility,
Mardukas responded humorlessly. Just then, the ship's mother AI began to sound an alarm, calling for Tessa. What is it? She asked. Channel G1, Major Kalinen. Put him through. Aye, ma'am. The mother AI put her through to Major Andrei Kalinin, their operations commander currently in Japan on another mission. The channel opened, and the man's deep voice boomed through.
Colonel, Mom, how did you things go in the training camp?
It was a bust, she answered. The terrorist group we were after wasn't there.
A21, you mean?
Kalinin didn't sound especially surprised.
I received word that one of their members was arrested at Narita Airport.
I'm glad of that, Tessa said after a moment, but it sounds like bad news.
Yes, the boy they caught had the expected behavior.
Tessa's expression clouded over. You mean...
It's very likely that he can use a Lambda driver,
Kalinin told her. The Lambda driver, an inscrutable device that could prove to be extremely dangerous in the wrong hands. It fed off the user's will to unlock such potential as to one day render even nuclear weapons obsolete. It took a special kind of person to use it, but if that despicable terrorist group had one in their ranks...
He is currently in Japanese government custody, so we can't run more detailed tests,
Kalinin continued.
I was hoping you'd come to observe him directly, Colonel.
Understood. I'll make arrangements soon, Tessa responded, before closing the channel. Again, she wondered, who is making these dangerous things? June 10:01 hours, Japan Standard Time. Schoolyard, Jindai High School, Chofu, Tokyo. The ball slipped just past the metal bat and flew into the catcher's mitt. Strike! You're out! A girl in a gym uniform proclaimed sluggishly. So, that's 3 outs, right? Time to change positions. At the umpire's declaration, the girls swiftly swapped between batting and fielding. Whew! Chidori Kaname, the pitcher who had just struck out her opponent, shook out her right arm as she got off the mound. Chidori had black hair that came down to her waist. She was on the tall side, with a balance of proportions that was notable even through her gym uniform. She had a strong-willed, noble aura about her, at least when she wasn't talking. Kana-chan, that was 3 up and 3 down, Tokiwa Kyoko, Kaname's classmate, said as she sat down next to her. Kaname flashed the smug smile of feigned modesty particular to girls who do well in gym class. Easy as pie, she declared, flashing her friend a V sign. That's not what I mean. This is just softball for class, Kyoko explained. It's not right to take it so seriously. You really freaked Shiori-chan out. Huh? I did? You did, her friend confirmed. Hey, are you in a bad mood or something? Every time I've talked to you today, you've been crabby. You can tell, huh? You're sharp, Kyoko. Kaname had been friends with Kyoko since the first day of school, so it was hard to hide anything from her. Did something happen with Sagara-kun? Kyoko asked even more sharply. That wasn't just a bullseye, it was a dead center hit. Her classmate, Sagara Sosuke, was indeed the one responsible for Kaname's bad mood. She'd promised yesterday morning that she'd help him study for term finals. Sosuke was supposed to stop by her house at 7 o'clock that night, but he hadn't come. She had tried calling his cell phone, but she'd just gotten the message that it was out of range. Then it had gotten to be past 8, then past 9, past midnight. When morning came, the handmade dishes she'd made in lieu of studying the minute she got handmade dishes as in food, in lieu of studying the minute she got home, were still sitting on her kitchen table. For certain reasons, Kaname lived alone. Nah, she lied nonchalantly. It's not him. Kyoko saw through her immediately. I knew it. I notice he's not here today. Do you know why? They could hear the voices of the boys playing basketball from the gymnasium behind them. Sousuke hadn't been among them. Why would I? Kaname scoffed. He just ran off yesterday during lunch, remember? I haven't seen him since. Then why are you so mad? Kyoko asked. I told you, it's not about him. What do I care what the guy does all day? It was another lie. This was another lie, of course. She wouldn't have prepared all that food if she didn't care. Baked mackerel, squid and daikon stew, pidan tofu, chawanmushi, and more. Kaname found herself sighing. Kyoko interrupted with a poke to her shoulder. You're up, Kaname? Huh? Oh, I guess I am. Kaname stood up, grabbed a bat, and walked up to the plate. As she went, she heard the vague sound of a helicopter from somewhere nearby. She looked up at the sky, but there was no sign of anything in the area. Still, she was sure she could hear the pounding of rotors and the low roar of an engine approaching. She ended up shrugging. Ah, well. The pitcher threw her an underhand pitch. It came to her so slowly she could make out every detail on the ball. Kaname projected Sousuke's over-serious, sullen face onto it. Sousuke, you... She hefted up the bat. Jerk! She cried, and swung with all her might. There was a satisfying thunk of contact, and the ball flew toward high left field. She'd really gotten a piece of it, and the outfielders ran back in panic. Her team was cheering. The ball rose higher and higher. Then it stopped suddenly and began to fall straight down toward the left fielder. It was as if it had hit some kind of wall. Kaname gaped. She had been so sure of her home run that she found herself stopped just before second base. The other students were similarly forced to stop and stare up at the sky. No one could see anything. Wait, is that a rippling in the air? Just as the thought occurred to her, the persistent sounds of a helicopter suddenly grew in volume as a fierce wind kicked up over the grounds. It stirred up the dust, reducing her visibility to just a few meters. What in the world is... She screamed, but she couldn't even hear her own voice. The wind was so strong she couldn't keep her eyes open. She threw herself on the ground, as if to cling to the base. The mysterious roar finally reached its peak and then moved away as swiftly as it had come. Immediately after, the wind died down and the silence returned. Kaname looked up. There was still nothing in the sky, no sign of a helicopter or any similar craft. What's going on? For heaven's sake, she grumbled. She was just picking herself up when she found herself face to face with a boy in a summer uniform. He was about 175 centimeters tall, with a slim but toned frame. A large olive-green backpack hung from his right hand, and he carried a black school bag in his left. Sousuke? She began tentatively. The boy, Sagara Sousuke, gave an alert look around, then said, Chidori? In a completely neutral voice. He had a well-proportioned face, but there was an intensity to it, a guardedness that never wavered even for a moment. His eyes always seemed to be looking past her at something else. His brow was wrinkled, and his mouth was drawn into a tight frown. His black hair was cut haphazardly, like a man who didn't care at all for style. Sousuke looked at his watch, then at the school's clock. It seems I was only 2 hours late, he remarked. The rush back proved worthwhile then. What are you talking about? Kaname hissed, resisting the urge to lay him out on the spot. I came straight from the South China Sea, he explained. I only just arrived. Kaname didn't know what to say. In response to her silence, Sousuke gave her a shameless once-over, seeming only then to notice her gym uniform. Were you having a match? Yes, but thanks to someone's bizarre arrival in some weird thing, my home run is ruined. The next time you hear a helicopter, you should be more careful. Well, I should join the boys' class. He started to turn toward the gymnasium, then suddenly stopped and looked back. By the way, Chidori,
What?
are you mad about the promise yesterday?
Oh, no way! I'm not bothered in the slightest.
Kaname threw her arms open wide and shook her head, sarcasm on full blast.
Oh, no way! I'm not bothered in the slightest.
There we go. Much better. Unfortunately, her intent didn't get through. I'm glad to hear that, Sosuke said in tones of sincerity. When I remembered my promise, I felt sure that you would be angry. She stared at him.
You forgot?
I did, he replied. Something very important came up, you see. Then he turned at last and headed toward the gym, his steps light and backpack swaying. At first, Kaname couldn't do anything but stand there, with trembling, clenched fists. Then, at last, she picked up the base at her feet and—
Why, you—
She cast it at him frisbee style. She wasn't aiming at anywhere in particular, but the base ended up hitting the back of Sosuke's head, the one part of his body there was no way to train. He made no sound, but dropped his bag and backpack and collapsed onto the ground.
You idiot! I hate you so much!
Kaname yelled at him. The infielder holding the ball took that same moment to approach and tag her out. June 26, 10:28 hours, Japan Standard Time. Outskirts of Sayama, Saitama Prefecture. It took 6 hours by helicopter from the Tuach Dedanan Let's try that over again. Tongue twisters, they are present. It took 6 hours by helicopter from the Tuach Dedanan in the Pacific, during which the regular roar of the engine had become like a lullaby. The windows cut out a lot of light from the sky, and the craft was constantly vibrating, an environment that inclined Talitha Testarossa to doze. She wasn't even dreaming. Deep beyond the depths of consciousness, the usually hurried currents of her mind, now sat as still as a lake. Colonel. It took a moment for her to realize that she was being called. 3 minutes, Colonel. Though she captained the submarine that served as their base, the ground forces of the Tuach Dedanan called their commander-in-chief Colonel rather than Captain. It was a custom unique to Mithril, so as not to confuse it with the military rank. Tessa stirred in her seat, then quickly opened her eyes. I'm sorry to interrupt you while you were resting, ma'am. We'll be arriving in 3 minutes. The young man addressing her was one Corporal Yang, dressed in his civilian clothing. Born in Korea, he was a member of their combat team, and used the same Uru's call sign as Mao and the others. He was currently serving as Tessa's bodyguard.
Where is Sagara-san?
She asked, looking around the cabin.
The sergeant landed in Tokyo earlier. He asked me to thank you, ma'am.
I see.
Sagara Sosuke. Like Corporal Yang, he was a combatant with the Uru's call sign. He had recently started attending school in Tokyo as part of a certain special mission. She was the captain and he was an NCO, so they didn't have many chances to talk, and they weren't particularly close. And yet, she found herself taking interest in him. Like her, he had a reason for being the youngest in his squadron, and she was a little bit curious about the life he'd made for himself at school.
Now,
Tessa peeked into her hand mirror and straightened up her appearance. She fixed the collar of her blouse and pulled down the hem of her pencil skirt. She looked down from the window at their destination. It was an open plot of white-walled buildings, nestled in the pine-covered hills. At a glance, it might look like a suburban college campus, though most campuses weren't surrounded by tall fences or patrolled by men in camouflage. It was a technological research facility run by the Japanese Ministry of Defense, Tessa was told. It was generally unknown to the majority of the populace, designed to handle highly classified research, and it was where the boy in question was being held. The circumstances that had led to his capture might have come about by coincidence, but she was glad he was in custody. Leaving him at large could have led to disaster.
Landing now,
Came the pilot's voice through her headset as they descended. The facility's helipad looked a bit small for their helicopter, but it was still easier for their pilot to handle than an emergency landing under gunfire. Once they were on the ground, Corporal Yang helped Tessa down the gangway. Major Andrei Kalainen came to meet her, buffeted by the wind of the rotors. He was the commander of the Tuach de Danan's ground forces, and he had arrived at the facility ahead of Tessa. He was a Russian, just past 40, broad-shouldered and nearly 190 centimeters tall. He had a well-chiseled face, a gray mustache and beard, and gray hair to match, tied back into a tail. Tessa's own hair being ash blonde, they looked a bit like father and daughter when they stood side by side. "Thank you for coming all this way, Colonel Ma'am," Kalainen said, his words managing to pierce through the helicopter's roar.
Oh, please, she responded. You called me because you need me, right?
"Indeed." Kalainen seemed unfazed by her slightly snide tone. On the submarine, he typically wore a uniform of dull olive green, but now he was in a brown suit. Plain though it was, it gave him a slight air of refinement.
And who is this?
Tessa turned her attention to the Japanese man behind Kalainen. This one wore the utterly unremarkable navy suit of a bureaucrat. I don't know where I got the extra IC. This one wore the utterly unremarkable navy suit of a bureaucrat. He appeared to be just past 30, on the heavy side, and wore black-rimmed glasses. "Shimamura from the Ministry of Transport," the man replied in fluent English. "I'm taking the lead on this incident."
A pleasure, Mr. Shimamura,
Tessa said. "The pleasure is all mine, Dr. Testarossa." Shimamura... Tongue twisters today. My lips don't work. Shimamura greeted her with a geniality that skillfully concealed his deep curiosity about her. Most people tended to be either amused or enraged to discover that a 16-year-old girl was such an important figure in Mithril's clandestine organization. The fact that Shimamura was neither suggested that Kalainen had fed him a cover story in advance. "I'm surprised how young and beautiful you are," he was saying. "For a minute I thought you were a girl in her mid-teens. I can hardly believe you're really 30.
What?
Tessa asked, surprised. "Ah, excuse me, it's bad manners in any country to speak of a lady's age." Shimamura then soberly began to walk, apparently expecting them to follow. Tessa remained where she was, side-eyeing Kalainen.
Major, what did you tell him?
"That you were a genius. As for the age issue, I thought it might be a stretch, but he seems to have bought it," Kalainen responded lightly enough.
30.
Tessa looked over her petite frame. If there had been a mirror present, she might have started burning holes in her own face.
Do I really look that old?
She anxiously asked Corporal Yang, who stood nearby. "I don't know," he said with a laugh. "Maybe you just work hard. Maybe you just work hard to look that way." Maybe you just work hard to look that. Oh my gosh, my brain did not understand how that sentence worked. Oh boy. I was worried today would be rough, but here we are. "I don't know," he said with a laugh. "Maybe you just work hard to look that way." An unpaved road ran through the forest about a kilometer from the facility. Cars rarely traveled that way, but it was currently home to a large black trailer, beside which a small group of men and women stood. All of those present were young, about 20 years old, give or take. Despite their rather fashionable civilian clothing, a strange, silent tension hung over the group. They were watching a large transport helicopter descend toward the facility's helipad. As it disappeared behind the trees, a man standing on the roof of the trailer lowered his binoculars and said, "The American Army?" He glanced down at a woman standing on the road below, as if seeking her opinion on the matter.
No, the woman answered.
She, too, was young, and dressed in a long red coat, despite the early summer. She had almond-shaped East Asian eyes and chestnut hair, which had been done in a mushroom cut. She possessed what many might describe as the face of classic beauty.
It lacked a national insignia, and the USFJ doesn't have helicopters like that.
"And where are they from?" the man asked again.
I don't know.
"You don't know?"
What does it matter? She questioned. We're here to get Takuma out. If someone gets in our way, we get them out of it. End of story.
"That's pretty cold, Sena. They've got your dear little brother in there, remember? Aren't you worried?"
That's pretty cold, Sena. They've got your dear little brother in there, remember? Aren't you worried?
One of the men said teasingly.
Of course I'm worried. We need him for the plan.
The woman called Sena replied dispassionately. "That's true." Another of the men smiled a thin smile. "We can't move that devil, the behemoth, without Takuma, and once it's up and running, even the JSDF will have to flee for the hills." "Yeah, no one can stop us," another of the group said.
We'll burn that disgusting city down. I give it 2 days until the city center is rubble,"
added another. The woman called Sena stood silent at first, then said,
Let's get ready for the raid.
It was at that moment that they noticed a car approaching down the forest road. It was black and white. A police car. A police car. It was probably doing rounds in the area. "What should we do?"
You take the driver.
Sena ordered. The car stopped next to the trailer. The driver, a young patrolman, looked like he was going to stay inside, while the head officer in the passenger seat stepped out. "What are you people doing here?" the elderly officer demanded. "Don't you know civilian vehicles aren't allowed here? Who's the driver? I want to see your license. And what are you carrying in there?"
Just rubbish.
Sena's right hand, previously thrust into her right pocket, now whipped out. It held a pistol with a silencer, which she fired twice into the officer without batting an eye. It made a strange shoo-shoo sound, and the officer died on the spot. The patrolman in the car didn't even know what had happened until two members of the group fired suppressor-attached submachine guns at him. The breaking of the windshield was louder than the gunshots. "He's dead," one man said, peering at the driver, who now lay in a pool of blood. Just then the young patrolman let out a groan. "Help!" With a slightly awkward expression, the man fired a few more times, this time at close range. "Well, these things happen," he said with embarrassment as the patrolman's moaning died out.
Enough, Sena said. Clean up the corpses and let's get moving. I'll inspect the machinery.
She walked around behind the trailer and opened the double doors. Inside lay an arm slave, a kind of second-generation Soviet AS known as an RK-92 Savage. Sena threw off her coat, revealing a skin-tight orange operator's uniform that hugged her supple form. It would have resembled a scuba diver's outfit, if not for the clunky G-suit, harness, and lock bolt.
A prelude to destruction, eh?
She whispered, too softly to be heard. June 12:33 hours, Japan Standard Time. South School Building, Jindai High School, Chofu, Tokyo.
Come on, Sagara-kun. Head trauma can be serious business, you know.
Sosuke's classmate, Kazama Shinji, said to him as they walked down the fourth-floor hallway at lunch. Shinji was an unassuming type, half a head shorter than Sosuke, with pale skin and wide eyes. He used to wear rather shabby-looking glasses, but he'd recently switched to contact lenses, which increased his fashionability a bit. That was the kind of boy he was.
I'll be fine, Kazama,
Sosuke responded glumly. There seemed to be more behind his despondence than the blow to the head he'd taken that morning.
I hope so. You'll make Chidori-san sad if you die. She'll be weeping. I killed him, while she slits her wrists in the bath.
I find that highly doubtful, Sosuke replied. The words, I hate you, kept bouncing around in his mind. Chidori Kaname had had him on full ignore since the incident that morning, and since Sosuke was an inherently reticent person, he couldn't come up with a pretense to approach her. Instead, he'd ended up agonizing his way through the first half of the day. Chidori hates me.
Ah, there you go again. You grew up in a war zone, but you can't even stand up to Chidori-san? It's pathetic, man, no joke.
I'm sorry. It was common knowledge around Jindai High that Sosuke had been raised overseas, in dangerous war-torn regions of the world. Yet most took that with a grain of salt and ended up labeling him the weirdo returnee, or the pain-in-the-ass transfer student. Nobody knew that he was a member of a super-secret military organization called Mithril, and that he was an elite soldier on their special response team to boot. Nobody, except for one person. The boys came to a stop in front of the student council room. Sosuke had been granted a dubious title, head of school security and aide to the student council, which mainly meant that they sent him on various errands during meetings and events. Shinji had the more proper title of Culture Festival Committee Vice Chairman. Culture Festival season was still a ways away, but June was around the time he was supposed to begin participating in executive committee meetings about preparation and funding.
The president sure is hardcore, Shinji remarked. He still wants to hold meetings, even with term finals next week.
It is important to receive regular updates, Sosuke observed before opening the door and entering the room. Only 3 students were there. 2 first years and 1 second year, the accountant, all boys. The president was nowhere to be seen, even though it was almost starting time.
Hey, isn't there a meeting today?
Shinji asked. A student in the corner glanced up from watching the room's LCD TV.
No one told you it was canceled? He decided to call it off this week since tests are coming up and there's a lot on the table. There's not a lot on the table.
Yeah, we never got the message.
You're in class 4, right? The vice president, Chidori-senpai, should have known.
Gee, sheesh, that's mean of her. I guess we'll head back to class then. Darn it.
As Shinji turned to leave, grumbling, he happened to bump into a girl on her way in. It was Kaname. She had been in her gym clothes when Sosuke had met her that morning, but now she was in her summer uniform, a blue skirt and a white blouse with short sleeves, secured at the neck by a red ribbon. With a red ribbon.
Oh, Kazama-kun.
Chidori-san, he said resentfully, we saw you in class before. Why didn't you tell us?
Chidori Kaname, the student council vice president, cast a look in Sosuke's direction before forcing a cheerful, friendly tone.
Hey, I'm sorry, Kazama-kun. It totally slipped my mind. We'll really want your help next time, though, so I hope you forgive me. I'm really sorry. Please?
Well, I guess these things happen. Take care, okay?
No, these things don't just happen. I promised the president I'd tell you, and forgetting a promise is the worst thing a person can do, Chidori told him pointedly. It's an act of cruelty to the person you let down. If a man broke a promise to me, I'd never, ever forgive him.
As he listened in, Sosuke found a greasy sweat forming on his temples. Shinji seemed to notice the tension in the air and insisted,
No, it's not really that big a deal. Anyway, I'm going back to class now.
Then he left. With Shinji gone, Kaname's face immediately lost its cheer. She turned a glare toward Sosuke, gave a and then walked toward the back of the student council room. She laid the documents she'd been carrying onto the president's desk, staked out a place at a corner of the large table, and opened her study materials. Sosuke turned pale, then slid his backpack from his shoulders and began searching around inside it. But Kaname showed no interest. At last, apparently finding what he was looking for, Sosuke pulled it out and approached Kaname.
Don't hover over me. It's creepy.
Kaname said in stinging tones, eyes locked on the blank page in front of her. Then, as if screwing up his courage, Sosuke offered her a bouquet of white flowers.
What?
She breathed. The blooms were about the size of a fist, 4 petals gently wreathing a round ovary. There were 6 of them, and Kaname found herself taken aback by their beauty.
I just picked them last night, Sosuke told her. Please accept them. Thanks.
She fought hard to keep a smile off her lips.
Maybe I've been immature. Maybe it's time to forgive him, she found herself thinking. What kind of flowers are these? They're beautiful.
She asked in a slightly more mellifluous voice.
Well, the flowers themselves aren't important. I'd rather they wilt sooner than later.
Huh?
Those are opium poppies, Sosuke explained. After the petals fall, you can score the seed pod so that it secretes opium. It's the main ingredient in heroin, so they should fetch a high price in Japan.
He's so thoughtful. Kaname fell silent. Her face, which had been softening, now tensed again. Of course a war-obsessed fool like him wouldn't know the custom of giving flowers to a woman you'd hurt.
If memory serves, she said slowly, these flowers only grow in dangerous areas in Southeast and Central Asia.
They're also cultivated in certain regions of the Philippines, Sosuke said helpfully. I availed myself while I was on a job.
A job?
Kaname looked up at Sosuke questioningly.
Wait a minute.
She stood up and pulled Sosuke out of the room. Once they were in the hallway, she checked to make sure no one else was around, then whispered,
A job? For Mithril, you mean?
Yes, I had an emergency call. We went to the Philippines and back, Sosuke admitted readily enough. Kaname was the one classmate of his who knew his real job. It had all started 2 months ago. Kaname, a supposedly ordinary high school girl, had nearly been kidnapped by cunning terrorists. She had been saved by Sosuke, who had been deployed to their school as a transfer student at Mithril, the organization to which he belonged. She still didn't know why the terrorists were after her, or why a group like Mithril would go out of their way to protect her. All she knew was that she was a special entity known as a Whispered, that's with a capital W, that she possessed some sort of important information, and that Sosuke, as her bodyguard, had to be in her life at all times. To put it bluntly, though, he was a piss-poor bodyguard. Like yesterday, he frequently left her behind to travel overseas. He'd given her a mini-transmitter necklace to wear even when you're in the shower or sleeping, but she had her doubts about how useful that would prove. It was all very nerve-wracking at first, but as time passed, she'd grown accustomed to this way of life. In reality, she hadn't been attacked even once in the 2 months since that incident. It seemed that she could just live a normal life. For now, anyway. Realizing at last why he'd broken his promise, Kaname let out a sigh.
Darn it. If that's what it was, you could have just told me.
I was in a hurry, he apologized. I'm sorry.
So, did it all work out?
Yes, Kurt's managed to get back in action, too.
Oh, that's good.
Yes, it is. So, do those poppies close the deal? This time, Kaname struck him with a closed fist. It was a powerful hook that grazed Sosuke's jaw and sent him staggering. That really hurt.
Shut up! Why do you have to be like this? Don't you realize there's something you should say before you go offering me drugs? I don't care what kind of awesome mercenary you are, you're a seriously broken human being.
Actually, Sosuke remarked, I'm perfectly healthy.
I'm talking about your common sense. From the moment I first met you, you've been a pathetic idiot, making trouble for everyone, never showing any reflection, and I just...
She trailed off into screeches of rage as she took a slipper in each hand and started slapping Sosuke's head with them. I understand. Please stop. You've made yourself very clear, Sosuke said soothingly. Kaname stopped, her shoulders heaving.
Do you really understand? I'm talking about sensitivity and good faith.
Good faith? How about this, then? In Tokyo, cocaine will sell for a higher price than heroin. If you truly find this unacceptable, I could get you some coca paste to... Kaname unleashed a high roundhouse kick to the back of Sosuke's neck. Yes, indeed, I am back. Thanks for tuning in, Slaughteroo. 26 June, 1310 hours, Japan Standard Time. Japan Ministry of Defense Technical Research Facility, outskirts of Sayama, Saitama Prefecture. Across the one-sided glass was a boy. He sat on a chair in a bare-bones interrogation room, staring at a point on the table in front of him. He looked about the same age as Tessa, his small frame clothed in purple pajamas. He seemed like an ordinary young boy in every respect, yet at the same time he had the aura of someone fundamentally other. Was this young man really a member of A21, the terrorist organization which had planned a series of bombings a few years ago? It was definitely hard to believe. Tessa was watching from the observation room. She knew that she couldn't be seen from the interrogation room, but somehow she felt like the boy could sense her eyes upon him.
It was purely by chance that he was caught at Narita Airport,
Major Kalinin explained, standing behind Tessa in the dim light.
He passed himself off as a student returning from a language study in New Zealand, so Japanese customs didn't give him a second thought. They frequently don't even check such passengers' belongings. If he'd kept his head down, he would have slipped through easily.
But he didn't keep his head down, did he? She returned. What exactly did he do?
He flew at a customs official, hit him, and tried to wring his neck.
Kalinin said offhandedly. He did that? Even Tessa, who had an idea of why it might happen, could hardly imagine the boy showing such violence.
Yes, even after his arrest he seemed excessively agitated, so they ran a drug test. His blood tested positive for Thai 971, a drug we at Mithril have been tracking for some time. We learned about it yesterday through some complicated channels.
That's capital T, lowercase I, 971. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but we went with Thai. And that's why you called me, Tessa concluded.
Precisely. Someone's been conditioning him to use a Lambda driver, and I believe you're the only one who can judge whether or not they've succeeded.
The Lambda driver was a device that could channel a user's will into phenomena that defied the laws of physics. It was one of the products of black technology, unbelievable advancements in tech that far outstripped anything contemporaneous. Tessa was the only person in the world who could fully understand and utilize black technology to any degree. Or rather, she had thought she was. She'd been starting to wonder if some other power had access to it and was doling it out to dangerous terrorists and authoritarian states. That same power might have given special training and drugs to the boy before her. It was a conditioning that came with side effects. Violent outbursts, memory loss, and the boy was showing signs of a few of them, it seemed.
The Japanese government is unaware of his significance, Kalinin told her. They refuse to turn him over to us, but only for legal reasons.
I see. Tessa flipped through the printed documentation that described the tests he'd undergone. It was headed by the name on his passport, Kugayama Takuma. She didn't know if it was a real name or an alias, but the address and family information were apparently fabricated. I read through the specific values before, and I didn't see anything that would rule it out. If he has undergone conditioning, that means they have a Lambda driver mounted weapon ready for him somewhere out there. Somewhere out there. Much better. The terrorists would have their hands on a machine of unimaginable power, a destructive weapon that conventional arms couldn't hope to combat.
In addition to whoever did this to him, I'm curious as to whether anyone else from A21 has returned to Japan,
Kalinin said. Do you think you can get him to talk? She asked, referring to the two subjects he'd raised.
He's keeping mum, and the standard interrogation techniques don't seem to work, and cruel and unusual methods are out of the question while he's in Japanese government custody.
Tessa scowled a little at Kalinin's blunt wording. They'd be out of the question in Mithril custody as well. I would never allow such a thing. Just then, without any warning, the boy leaped over the table and lunged in Tessa's direction. Screaming at the top of his lungs, he slammed into the mirror and staggered. Despite knowing he couldn't possibly break through, Tessa dropped the documents she was holding and fell to the ground in shock. Takuma just bared his teeth and kept slamming into the mirror again and again, perhaps not realizing it was futile. He seemed like a different person, a different species, even, as he pounded on the one-way glass, howling like a beast. Security poured into the interrogation room to restrain him.
Colonel, ma'am,
Said Kalainen.
were you hurt?
I'm fine. I was just a bit startled.
With Kalainen's help, Tessa picked herself up. After letting her racing heart slow, she began to gather up the spilled documents. Kalainen helped her there, too.
He definitely wanted to wring my neck.
She was trying to sound casual, but she knew immediately that she'd failed.
Anyway, if we want to do proper testing, we'll have to bring in a portable NILS to measure his reactions. But I think he's probably one of them. Call it a gut instinct.
What do you think of an interview?
Kalainen questioned.
I'll do it, though probably not alone. Eek!
While bending down to pick up one of the dropped papers, she bumped her head on the corner of a table. A dizzying pain shot from her head to her toes. She moaned and stumbled back. Kalainen caught her and held her up.
Colonel?
I'm fine. It's nothing serious.
She responded with tears in her eyes. She was acutely aware of her clumsiness, but then, gifted as she was with intelligence and beauty, it would be too much for her to ask for grace as well.
Anyway, let's go. We won't accomplish anything by sitting here.
Yes, ma'am.
Tessa and Kalainen left the observation room. Her bodyguard, Corporal Yang, was waiting in the corridor. Shimamura, their host, was in front of the interrogation room door, discussing something with Takuma's attending physician. Once he was done, Shimamura approached them.
I'm sorry, they've had to give him a tranquilizer. You'll have to wait until this evening for your interview.
Tessa's heart sank. She'd had a feeling this would happen.
Very well. By the way, if I may ask, are you certain that your security measures are foolproof?
I assure you, not even an ant could slip inside, Shimamura reassured her. Why do you ask?
It occurred to me that someone might try to break in.
Shimamura gave her his most condescending look.
Please, you think those terrorists will try to get him back? A simple drug addict? I don't know what interest Mithril has taken in him, but even we just want him back in the police hospital ASAP.
That isn't what I mean, Tessa began to explain. What I'm trying to say is that his importance...
Shimamura cut her off with a dismissive wave.
This facility is far more important than he is. We have the strictest security possible. We have 2 platoons. You know what that means? It means 60 men patrolling in shifts at all times. Added to the fact that knowledge of his transfer was restricted to the department.
Shimamura's words were interrupted by a roar. A series of shots shook the air around them, the sound of a massive autocannon. It was followed by a metallic grinding sound and an explosion. Tessa looked out the window. Fire and smoke billowed from the direction of a distant hospital building within the facility grounds. A security vehicle was in flames, the aftermath of an explosion. There was the sound of small arms fire now, coming in short bursts. Rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat-tat-tat. She heard shouts of anger, cries for help.
What in the world?
Someone was attacking the laboratory. Was it A21 coming to retrieve Takuma?
Colonel, get away from the window.
Kalainen, automatic pistols suddenly in hand, pulled Tessa by the arm. Corporal Yang moved swiftly to the corner of the hallway to evaluate the situation outside. Tessa shook herself out of her momentary stupor.
They're after Takuma. We need to get him out of here.
She immediately headed to the interrogation room nearby.
I can't recommend that, Colonel,
Kalainen said.
Why not?
We have no authority here. We should hide out and wait for them to take Takuma away.
Tessa knew well that this wasn't simple cowardice. Kalainen was simply a cautious man by nature. He wanted to avoid unnecessary risks. But she shook her head in response.
We can't let A21 have Takuma. If they're going to lengths like these to get him back, it means they don't have a substitute. I'm sure they have some terrible weapon for him to pilot. Letting them have him would be extremely dangerous.
Keeping you safe will take everything Yang and I are capable of, Kalinin retorted. And the enemy is...
Wait a minute, Shimamura said, recovering from his initial confusion. He's right. You aren't authorized. We can't have you taking the boy with you.
But if you can't protect him, we'll have to, won't we?
As I explained to you before, we have a fully armed security team. No matter how many they send, they won't succeed.
As if to punctuate his words, an armored car with a 20mm autocannon chose that moment to pass in front of their building.
You see, Shimamura continued, let's see their rifles stand up to something like that.
Oh, I meant to change the cover image. My bad. This one moves quick. I think it's that one there. Whoops, I don't know how to press buttons good. That's better. Whoops, don't drop that.
You see, Shimamura continued, let's see their rifles stand up to something like that.
No, tell them to fall back,
Kalinin tried. Immediately, the armored car was speared by a line of fire, which sent metal parts flying. Spewing smoke, it first skidded, then exploded. One of the fragments broke through the window next to Tessa with a crash. The culprit revealed itself from behind the hospital building, an enormous figure stepping out of the flames. Its torso was squat and egg-like, its legs and arms spindly. It was the second-generation Soviet AS, the RK-92 Savage, wielding an unadorned 40mm rifle.
An arms slave? You can't mean...
Shimamura's voice was close to a shriek. It was a natural reaction. Most people had only ever heard of them in civil wars in war-torn regions. A sudden AS raid here in Japan was like getting a pound of spare ribs dropped on your plate in the middle of a multi-course traditional meal. That is quite an analogy.
I can't believe it.
The gray-painted savage took step after step toward their hospital building. Its head-mounted machine guns ripped through the assembled security forces. Its rifle riddled a nearby building with holes. Tessa could hear the death cries of the men whose lives it claimed. Two round red eyes flicked in their direction. An inhuman gaze. For some reason, she felt like the AS was laughing at her. The head-mounted machine guns took aim in her direction. The 40mm rifle that had taken out the armored car was pointed toward her, too. It was about to shout. It was about to shoot.
Colonel!
Tessa was frozen to the spot. Kalinin and Yang ran at her simultaneously. Shimamura had already made himself scarce.
Get down!
In that moment, there was a powerful shock wave. The ceiling collapsed. Glass, steel, and concrete began to fall around them. There was no sound, and the fragments fell in slow motion. Close by, she could see Corporal Yang speared by a shard of glass, yet he was still running toward her, trying to protect her.
You don't have to go so far just for me,
Tessa thought to herself. Then another shock wave hit her. The Savage had secured the target building and its surroundings. The security forces showed no more signs of interfering. They were all AWOL, dead or dying, one of the three. The Gray Savage approached the devastated building through the smoke and dust that hung thick in the air. Planting a foot on the rubble, it stretched its hand through the collapsed wall. Then its joints locked up, holding it in that position. The hatch behind the head opened and the operator climbed out. She was dressed in her orange G-suit, her gaze unemotional, as if indifferent to the tragedy her rampage had wrought.
The woman, Sena, grabbed the submachine gun attached to the bottom of the hatch, then moved lithely down the arm of the savage to enter the building. The hallway was littered with debris. She stepped on the remnants of a corpse torn apart by the savage's machine guns as she walked, but she paid it no mind. She came to her destination, the interrogation room where she expected to find Takuma, and opened the door. But it was just a gray, empty space containing a toppled chair and a simple table. Sena said nothing. Her eyes flared with rage.
Sena, did you find Takuma?
A masked man, a member of the strike team, asked as he approached.
He's not here, she replied shortly.
No way. The transmitter reading said he'd be in this room.
He's not. He's been removed.
There were faint drops of blood around the room's entrance. A member of the security team, though injured, must have taken him away. But in such a short time? And without anyone on the strike team noticing?
We can still track the transmitter, can't we? She asked.
Yes, but it's out of range, the masked man told her. It'll take time to find them.
Begin the search immediately, Sena ordered him. We need Takuma to move that devil.
The man nodded, then said,
And there seems to be an injured person nearby. What do we do about him?
More security. Kill him.
Actually, I think...
The masked man made way so that she could see the injured man their allies were bringing up to her. It was a large Caucasian man, dressed in a tattered brown suit and bleeding here and there. He had several shards of glass sticking out of his back. It was a state that would kill most men. But though his head was bowed as he was dragged along, he still seemed to be conscious.
He doesn't appear to be part of the facility's staff,
One of the new team members noted.
Agreed,
Sena said.
What should we do, Sena?
Sena didn't respond, but used her submachine gun's barrel to tilt the man's face up. He had strong features and gray facial hair. Despite his injuries, his dark eyes glowed with defiance. Instinctively, she could tell that this was a man who made his living on the battlefield. It reminded her of someone she had nearly given her heart to long ago.
Who are you? She asked.
Your enemy,
He said, then lost consciousness. And that is where we will call it for today. I know, super short one this week. I had a later start than I would have liked. It's an hour and a half. That's not so bad. I would do the next chapter, but it's a really long chapter, and I'm not going to be able to get through it all. It is what it is. I'll live. You'll live. There's always next week. Wow, the chapter really does just keep on going. It is so far. How many pages long? 35, almost 40 pages. Neat. Neat. Anyway, yeah. So off to a kind of goofy start, but the climax of this book is wild. This one's pretty good. Um, very memorable. As he keeps flipping pages like a maniac. There we go. Okay. Trying to find now my Uzi What's It. So yeah, thanks again to everyone who tuned in. This week it is scheduled as normal. We'll be doing more of Absolution by Jeff Vandermeer this Wednesday and The Lazarus Effect by Bill Ransom and Frank Herbert on Friday. You too, Slaughteroo. Thank you. Fractal Hollow, thank you again for the input. I will check my Twitch settings to make sure that it is in the right category. I did try doing an edit to the channel description, and it didn't take for some reason that I can't identify yet. I will poke around at it again. I'm really unsure as to what the problem was there, but I'll figure it out. Anyway, that'll do it. I will see you all Wednesday or whenever. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. Until next time, toodaloo.